Welcome back to r/Landlords from Hell, where we read stories about the worst landlords imaginable, and maybe after hearing these stories you feel a little better about your own landlord. If you are new to the channel, please don't forget to subscribe to join our awesome community, and without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. And the first one is titled Sweet Revenge on My Landlord. I live in an expensive part of the United States. To live in a 500 square foot cottage, it costs me $2,100. Upon moving in, the 70-year-old landlady gave me the impression that the space would be a private sanctuary. She failed to mention that from the moment I moved in, she would start doing loud, invasive and extensive work on my property. To give you a little idea of the space, there is a 3-bedroom house next door, and then there is my place, a separate unit with its own yard. Attached is yet another unit that has been under construction. The landlady told me she planned on building a dance studio. She failed to mention that she would be building this when I signed the lease. Originally, the space was a 2-bedroom, but she built a closet separating the unit and turned it into a small 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom with a tiny kitchen with a living room. It is expensive, but hey, it's by the beach, secluded, and I thought I would have privacy. Boy, was I wrong. The landlady and her workers are here every single day from 1 PM to 8 PM, sometimes later, just generally when it gets dark outside. She has an unlicensed contractor working from 3 to 8 PM because that is the only time I can get him since he has a day job. They are cutting stones, doing all kinds of landscaping, redoing different structural parts of the houses, so loud hammering, but worst of all, the landlady is just always there. It felt like she was constantly watching me. I cannot keep my windows open or have the luxury of walking around naked in my own home because there's someone always there. The last thing I want when I come home at 5 PM after a long day of work is to hear loud noises, let alone my landlady. I put up with this because I didn't want to create conflict, but then she left an eviction notice in my mailbox informing me that she smelled MJ and that I had to move out within 30 days. Despite me being frustrated with the situation, I am very busy with work and didn't want to deal with finding a new place. I just had moved in 4 months prior, and it is a pain in the butt to find a place to live in this town. Lucky for me, she didn't realize that a just cause eviction law had recently passed in the city. I wrote her a lengthy letter informing her that she doesn't have grounds kicking me out based on a smell and must pay me to move out. Here is the revenge. I went down to the city and informed them that I have a hunch she had illegally turned her unit into a duplex. They came to my place the next day. I let them inspect my residence and showed them the work she had been doing in the unit connected to mine. They said they would look into it. I get a response from her lawyer letting me know that she was in fact wrong and cannot kick me out. She told my wife that she thinks that I am evil and that she had to go to therapy because of my letter. She also told her that the house got red tagged because I reported her to the city, so now she cannot have a duplex anymore and is going to have to occupy the other half as a room. Say bye-bye to your plans on building a dance studio, Karen. She will also have to demo all the work that has already been done because she didn't get permits. All because she was upset that she thought she smelled weed in the house. I have never felt so good getting someone back using the city laws against them. F landlords that try and screw people out of a home because they are control freaks. I definitely taught her a lesson, and I am moving out at the end of the month because I don't want to live here anymore. And guys, if you have watched until here, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post some star emojis in the comments if you enjoy my content. Thank you so much in advance. And the next one is titled, Use my family for cheap labor and kick them to the curb? That's gonna cost you. This story happened quite some time ago. I have never tried to seek out revenge before, but the way these people treated me and my family was utterly repulsive. And so here we have my first ever, and hopefully last, revenge story. First, the setup. My family lived in a house that was owned by, according to one of my family members, let's call her Mary, benevolent landlords. After they had lived there for 2 years on lease, the lease expired and so they started living there on a month-to-month basis. Mary's husband, let's call him John, suggested that they renew their lease, but Mary, being convinced that they had established a relationship of trust with the landlords, insisted that there was no need to do so. This was the first mistake. Sometime after, there was a storm that knocked over a relatively flimsy and frankly hideous chain link fence that was built around the house. Now, because Mary and John kept important things in their yard, they needed a fence. The landlords were looking around for contractors to rebuild the fence, but John had an idea that he felt would be beneficial for all. See, John and Mary really loved this house and they were hoping to someday buy it off the landlords, something that the landlords had suggested as a possibility from time to time. John suggested that he build the fence instead. He would only charge for the materials required and he would provide the labor at no cost under one important condition. The landlords must promise that they had no intention of selling the house. One landlord, we will call him Benny, not only promised John that the house wouldn't be sold anytime soon, but even went as far as saying that they would only ever consider selling the house to John and Mary, and so a deal was made. John would rebuild the fence more beautiful than it had ever been, and Benny and the other landlord would ensure that John and Mary would get to keep living in that house, enjoying the fruits of their labor until the day the landlords finally decided to sell the house to them. John and Benny agreed upon what the dimensions and material of the fence would be. They decided wood and they decided on the fence being fairly tall. John bought the materials and Benny paid John for the expenses. Halfway through building the fence, John asked Benny about whether he wanted certain changes in the backyard that would, alongside the fence, only serve to make the land value skyrocket. Benny said he would love said changes. The next part is important. John looked Benny in the eye and said, in no unclear terms, if you have any intention of selling this house to someone other than us, tell me now and I will stop this entire project. I'm only interested in building this under the condition that I will get to enjoy it. Benny responded equally clearly, you and your family will get to enjoy this home indefinitely, feel at ease and do whatever you want with this yard. And so the fence was finished and it was beautiful. This is the part where I come in. I came to visit my family and I helped them finish the fence and clean up the yard. I was not particularly happy about the terms of this agreement, but there was nothing that could be done now. Now comes the part where my family gets screwed. Hard. Not so much as a week after the fence had been built, Mary gets a call from the other landlord. Let's call her Jane. Jane tells Mary that something unexpected has occurred. See, her niece is currently on the market for a house and she really wanted to see this particular house. Mary, who can feel herself getting riled, asks Jane how this could be. The fence was only just finished and they are considering selling the house. Jane assures Mary that her niece will most likely not want the house, but that she has to let her see it. Very well. Now, I am not sure about the details that happened shortly after, but it seems that Jane's niece did not like the given price of the house, which was now more valuable than it was before, and so she chose not to buy. Bullet dodged, right? If only. Benny came to visit John and Mary with something they had always wanted. Suddenly the landlords wanted to sell and an offer was made to my family. Now, my family is not wealthy and they would have preferred to have been told well in advance of the intention to sell. Nonetheless, the offer that was presented was not unfair and my family said yes. Excellent. Yet, as soon as my family was approved to purchase the house, Benny came back with a change. The landlords no longer wanted to sell the house at the original price. Instead, the price they had in mind had now skyrocketed to roughly the same price as the most expensive house in the area. A price John and Mary could no longer afford and certainly more than the house was actually worth. That is not the worst of it though. Suddenly the landlords needed to sell the house immediately. John said to Benny, "We had a deal." Benny responded that they suddenly needed the money because of some family members' needs. Later on, the story changed to them no longer needing the money. Then it was Jane who needed the money because of some other piece of completely fabricated BS. The point was that they wanted to sell the house now to line their pockets, but they could never stick to a single excuse. Again, John told Benny that they had a deal. Benny's response, "I don't remember that. We never got anything in writing and so we never had any deal." Jane later told me a verbal agreement does not mean anything. Unfortunately, in the eyes of the law, nothing could be proven. We couldn't force them to sell the house to my family at the original price, and we couldn't force them to let my family keep living there. Alright, thought my family, we just want to get paid for the labor that we put into the fence then. This was not ideal, since they now needed to leave the home they had lived in for quite some time, but they knew it was not theirs and they were not going to put up a fight over it. At this point, they just wanted to get paid for their labor. Benny and Jane did not want to pay, my family members needed that money. Given that they were kicked out on such short notice, the money was needed in order to find a new place to live. Benny and Jane, however, insisted that they had always been fair with the rent and they simply didn't owe my family legally. I told Benny and Jane that we would just take things to court and have a judge decide. Given the fear of the court, Benny and Jane decided that they would pay my family, but that the labor for this gargantuan monstrosity of a beautiful fence just wasn't worth that much more than the materials it was made of. The labor couldn't possibly be that much, they reasoned. Also, they would only pay for the labor for the fence, not for the rest of the work that was done on the yard. Well, everyone decided to get an estimate. The average we got was $3,000 for the labor. Benny and Jane managed to get one estimate from one of their family members at $350. What a joke. The day to leave arrived and Benny and Jane paid my family far less than what the labor was actually worth. My family left. We lost so much. The effort that went into building this fence with the intention of getting to enjoy having it, under the agreement that they would get to keep living there, just to have it taken away and to barely even get paid for the labor. To get crapped on by these two guys. That was unacceptable to me. We couldn't win anymore, but I didn't want them to win either. So, the revenge. I read up on fences, I learned far too much about what was what and what wasn't allowed when it came to fences. I memorized every rule. I learned when permits were and were not needed. I learned what the allowed dimensions were. I learned about whether fences needed finish. Oh boy, the things I learned about fences. I learned that you don't need a permit if your fence gets damaged so long as you are rebuilding the exact same fence. But this was wood and the old one was chain link. I learned that the fence needed to be painted, but this one was not. I learned that the fence had a very specific height limit, one which this fence violated. These people were so happy to stick to the letter of the law when it came to screwing over my family, so I decided that I too would stick to the letter of the law. Somehow the county found out that this fence was permitless, unpainted and far too tall. Shortly after the county found this out, Benny and Jane got a visit from the county right before they managed to sell the house at their obscene price. Wouldn't you know it, their fence was built illegally and now sometimes you can just get a permit after the fact, but their fence was not allowed to be built the way that it was. There were no plans, no inspection nor anything else that the county required. It had to come down. My family got a very angry call. The landlords accused my family of never getting a permit, something that my family literally could not do given that this was not their property. Besides, it was the landlords who assumed no permit was needed and my family knew nothing about how permits worked. So the fence had to be torn down. There goes the money they saved by not paying my family. And they lost their prospective buyer. There goes the money they wanted to make and the land value of the house went down. There goes the price point they wanted to sell the house at and they need to build a new fence since no one will want to live in this house without some sort of fencing. Looks like they will need to pay for a new fence, labor and all from an actual contractor. We did not win, but neither did they. F you. And yeah guys, with these revenge stories, often people just win and sometimes it is a little bit hard to believe, but this story, I gotta say, sounds very realistic because in the end, obviously, OP did lose something, but they also won. And the next one is titled Wonderful Neighbors, a Rare Find Now, posted by user InterestingHunter19 on our own subreddit r/ripe stories. And just a little warning, this is a more positive neighbor story, not really a neighbor from hell. I have read many nightmare neighbor stories and have a few of my own that I will post in the future, but just for something different. I wanted to write about my incredible neighbors. I moved into my house in 2012 and started living here September 1st. One piece of info about me that is relevant is that I have Crohn's disease and have for many years. I was 40 when I moved in, and due to the stress of moving plus work plus having a bad case of Norwalk virus, I started having a lot of issues with my disease. I was in and out of hospital all of October as I kept having small bowel obstructions, and finally about the 10th of November it got so bad that I had to be transferred to a much bigger hospital in the city about 2.5 hours away. I wouldn't get out of hospital until April 12th and wasn't able to come home until April 20th. Spent the first week staying with my parents as they live in town, and I am approximately 25 minutes out of town and needed to be close to the hospital in case anything went wrong. During this time over 6 months, my neighbors who I had barely met and some that I hadn't met yet looked after my house. They mowed my grass as needed, shoveled my driveway and walk in case I came home, watched that no one went in that shouldn't, to the point that when my dad came to check on the house, my neighbor from across the street immediately came over to see who he was and why he was there. My dad was very impressed and thanked him for watching the house and even parked an extra car in my driveway so it looked like someone was home. Now, at that time my son was still at home. He had just turned 20, but being without a car he stayed with my parents most of the time I was in hospital, and him and my dad came to see me once a week and did my laundry, bringing me anything I needed, etc. And he helped me a lot once I was home, but 4 years ago he moved away for work, which left me on my own. Knowing I was ill, they started mowing my grass, snow blowing the driveway, taking my garbage to the street and anything else they thought I may need help with, and never asking or accepting money for it. My one neighbor right beside me who was mowing my lawn with this, I knew liked his beer, so I watched to see which brand and went and bought him a case of beer. When I brought it to him, he was surprised and asked me what it was for. I told him it was for mowing my grass and other things he had done to help me, and he replied with, "Well, that is just being a good neighbor." I replied with, "And this is just being an appreciative neighbor." He laughed and told me he would appreciate one of those right away. I now have a friend who lives with me every winter and has an RV trailer in a park for the summer, which I am welcome to come and use whenever I want, and he does the snow blowing for me, while we share the groceries and household chores. But I am not sure what I would have done without the help I get from my neighbors, without them expecting anything in return. There is so many nasty entitled people out there, and I have run into many of them, so I thought I would write about some of the good ones for a change. There are good people still left in the world, it is just getting hard to find them. And guys, I would sort of agree with that, but I would probably say that actually most of the people in the world are pretty nice, but of course we only hear the stories, at least here on my channel, about the really awful people. Anyway, thank you very much for sharing this wholesome story, because I think every once in a while we do need some good wholesome stories. And guys, unfortunately we have already reached the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and if you haven't already, please also go to patreon.com/ripeyoutube, where I upload exclusive Reddit videos starting at just $3 a month. This is a great way to support me in case you are interested, and the chance for me to become independent from YouTube revenue. Thank you so much for watching, please don't forget to subscribe and like the video, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.